Hello everybody, I'm Rainbow Red Panda and I just have I'm gonna call it a quick video, but it might end up being longer than I expect. Video about just something I sort of thought about today while I was on the subway coming back from the comic book store that I went to. Um, I've been to a few different stores here in New York, and every town that I go in, whether it's a big town or a small town, I always try to look up, if they have a comic book store, like how big it is, all that. Like I come from like a small area where my comic book store is like half the size of my apartment. So my apartment's small. Like I'm not saying I live in a huge apartment. I do not. And it's about half the size of my apartment, if not smaller. And I loved my little store. And then I've been into huge stores that are like 2 stories, and I love those as well. But I always try to look at comic book stores. And whenever I go in, most of the time, um, I'm treated just like everybody else. Any of the customers were all treated the same. Like I end up usually talking about comic books to people and stuff. And there's been a lot of articles lately with all of the reboots and revamps and just all of the publicity the comic book companies have been getting about changing the sex of a character or the color or any of that of a character, or just which characters they choose to like bring back. When Miss Marvel came out and when She-Hulk came out, it was sort of a big thing, like getting women to read comic books, and it was like there was this big like girls can read comic books too thing. And I totally agree with that, but I feel like that movement will hit a roadblock easily. It doesn't matter necessarily to me as a female. I've thought about this, and I haven't really ever made a video explaining like my opinion on all of that. I think I've talked about it a little bit in some of my comic times, but I feel like bringing back female characters and all of that is good. I know a lot of men that read those titles, though, just as many as women. I don't know a lot of females that read comic books. I've never had like a close female friend, or at least a lot of close female friends that read comic books. So it's something that if I'm going to discuss it with somebody, it's 99% of the time going to be a male. That's not because I prefer to talk to men over women about comic books. It's just I know right off the top of my head maybe like 2 women in my life that read comics, and I know a ton of men. So that's just sort of how the cookie crumbles. But to me, you can bring back any character, you can bring back anything, and it really just depends to me on how women are treated in the shops that they go to. I'm usually treated fairly just like everybody else, people, that's sort of not really an issue that you see a lot anymore. But today, for example, I went into a shop and I wasn't treated badly. I'm not saying like I was given horrible customer service and I will never go back again, because that's not how I feel. But I felt like I was being looked at as a girl who was in there to buy comics for her boyfriend, or was just, trying to figure out like what a comic book is and things like that. And I feel like that's sort of how a lot of women feel whenever they first start going into comic shops. That's how they're going to be treated. And a lot of people like are not going to be okay with that. If I'm going to go into a shop, I want to know that I'm going to be treated just like everybody else, whether it's my first time ever reading a comic book or it's like my 5,000th time being in the same store. Like I like to be treated the same way each time. And I think that's one thing. I don't think it's a big factor in getting more females to read comic books, but I think it's a factor that people don't necessarily take into consideration. You can bring back any character, but if someone doesn't feel comfortable enough to go to where they can get that, they're not going to read it. Now, we live in a day and age where I can order anything online and have it sent to my house. I never have to go into a comic book store. I try not to do that just because I like the atmosphere of comic book stores. But I mean, I feel like that's always an option, but some people don't like to buy stuff offline. Some people especially don't like to buy comic books online. That's one thing that I don't like about certain comic sites, and I will just say Midtown Comics is one of those. I've ordered stuff from them online before, but unless it's like a super special variant that they put in a bag and board anyway, it's not bagged and boarded, it's not protected really in a way that, like, if the postman just leaves it out in the rain or something, you're going to get a soggy book. And that's just, you know, that's just how they are. You can buy stuff off of eBay, and it may, you know, everyone's heard their horror stories. And comic book people are usually so particular. You know, I'm on so many different comic pages, and I see all the time people upset about things, how they were shipped, received, all of that. And it's sort of a thing, like, I feel like I could encase a comic book in, like, solid steel and have it also, like, just completely, like, impenetrable, like, wrapping. And the post office, ultimately, it really comes down to the post office. The post office is not gonna, you know, take care of it regardless. They don't care. They don't care what's in your packages. They just want them out of their lives and into yours. You know, that's not to say the post office is, like, bad, but in the end, like, that's all that shipping companies care about, is getting your stuff out of their way and to you. Like, that's all they care about. So I feel like sometimes blame is placed on them where it shouldn't be, but I mean, you always have the option of ordering stuff online, but some people like me like to go and get an actual hard copy of a comic book in a store. And if you're like me, like, you're not gonna, if you feel uncomfortable in a store because of your gender or your ethnicity or any of that, it's going to make you not buy these books that you want. And so you're not going to read them. The sales aren't going to be as high. Titles get canceled. I'm not saying that, like, you know, feeling uncomfortable in a comic shop is going to cancel a series, but I feel like it's something that, you know, Marvel, DC, Image, all of these publishers, they maybe need to stop thinking about, you know, how can we make these titles more appealing to everyone, and think about, you know, just making the comic community, you know, better for everyone. Like, I don't really know how a publisher would go about doing that, but it's just sort of a thing, you know? I mean, distributors, a lot of people don't like Diamond, but that's all that there really is. A lot of, I don't know, I don't have an answer for it, but I feel like if you're going to get people to read comic books, the first thing that you need to do is make them feel welcome in the atmosphere that they're in. Okay, new comic book readers, or whatever you want to call them. Some people call themselves noobs or whatever. I've heard a lot of people, like, refer to themselves in, like, really weird languages when it comes to, like, starting to read comic books. But I mean, all in all, the end result is you want, you know, I want the comic community to stay, you know, a thing. I want there to always be comic books around. You know, some people are like, oh, well, you just read new comic books. You don't know anything about, you know, the Gold Age and the Silver Age, so you don't know anything. You don't have the right to have an opinion on anything. And I don't think that's the right attitude to have either. I think that we need to all sort of find a middle ground, come together, and sort of all learn from each other. You know, maybe someone who's new to comics is going to see something in a perspective that, like, an older comic reader, you know, wouldn't have thought about. I've done a lot of review videos where I like a title for one reason, and I've had people comment and say, I hated this book, and then I heard your opinion and your perspective on it, and then finally I saw, like, what was going on from your point of view, and I actually like the title now. So I mean, that's sort of one way that everyone can work together, you know, talking about a book, not fighting about it, but just having a conversation in a community. And that sort of all starts with being comfortable to go into a shop, get comic books, you know, be able to read them and feel okay with having an opinion on them. You know, if I walk up to a guy and say, hey, I didn't like this issue of this comic book that I just read. I think the last one that I didn't really like was issue number 1 of Bitch Planet. It wasn't bad, but I don't know that I'm going to continue with the series. But, like, hey, I didn't like, you know, this new issue of Bitch Planet because I didn't really like the storyline. The characters weren't memorable. Like, it just seems too weird for me, and I'm just not a fan. Like, if they're just like, oh, well, you're a girl, you know, your opinion doesn't matter. Like, that was the best series ever written, and Kelly Sue DeConnick is, like, a goddess. Like it's not constructive for anyone. That's just gonna make me be like, okay, well, I can't talk to people about comic books, so I'm just gonna have to sit here in my bedroom and just keep it all to myself and not have conversations. Like that's not what it's about. You should be able to feel comfortable going into a comic book store and potentially engaging with people. If you see someone, even if I was in there just to buy comics for my boyfriend, you know, people should feel comfortable enough to at least come up and see if I needed assistance or if I had an opinion on a comic book. Like, if you see someone in your store, even if they're not in there to buy a comic for themselves, there's always going to be a book that people like. I feel like there's a comic book out there for everybody. People just don't realize that it's not all superheroes. And it's not. There's a lot of non-superhero comic books. You look at like some of the most successful TV series, you know, right now, like The Walking Dead is not about superheroes. A lot of people don't read the comic books, but to me, I haven't watched all of the series. I'm still on the first season. I'm not even gonna lie about that. But I love the comic. And I don't have to be a guy to think that. Like, that's the thing. Like, you can make all these comics that appeal to girls, but at the end of the day, boys and girls are all going to read, you know, the same things. I read so many things that guys read. Guys read so many things that girls read. Like, there's not a gender-specific thing for comics, and there shouldn't be, you know, gender roles in shops or any of that. Like, a girl can work in a comic book shop, and I don't see that very often anywhere. And I would like to think that one day I'm gonna be the little old lady working at a comic book store, like the one that I came from in Illinois. Like, I love that old lady. And I love that, like, you'll just be sitting there trying to think of a name of a comic book, and she knows it. She hasn't read it, but she knows it because she's just been around the shop forever. Like, I love that, and I want to be her. I aspire to be that little old lady. And one day I'm going to go back to Illinois, and hopefully she's still there, because I miss her. So yeah, I feel like I'm just gonna ramble about the same things. So that's sort of my video, you know. Everyone just needs to be accepting of all comic readers in all shapes, sizes, age, form, ethnicity, race, gender, everything. Like, I don't know, if this cat reads a comic book, you need to accept this cat, okay? Because if a cat reads a comic book, then it's probably an amazing comic book. I don't know, I mean, animals might like comics. Who knows? You don't know. So, you know, read a comic to your cat, and maybe then you guys can have a discussion about it. Or read a comic to your friend, and then you guys can have a discussion about it. Like, comic books are meant to be enjoyed. So don't make the process unenjoyable for anybody. Whether you're a comic book store worker, you're a publisher, you're a writer, you're an illustrator, you're anything, like, we're all sort of intertwined in this community that is comic book. And we all just need to accept that we all have to deal with each other. And so we might as well just like it and try to deal with each other as positively as possible, because no one likes negativity, and it's just gonna make comic books a bad experience for people if negativity is all that you get. So that's my video, and I'll see you guys with my next one. So, bye!